The setting off Anu wore the Louisiana sun, savage and uncompromising, beat down upon the cracked earth off Belle Reve Plantation. It was a landscape off cruel, desperate beauty in the year 1868. The war had ended 3 long years prior, but the conflict had simply morphed from cannon fire to economic strangulation. The elegant fluted columns off the main house stood scorched and bullet-marked monuments to a civilization that had collapsed entirely. Lady Claire, 22 years of age, stood on the gallery, not looking at the broken columns, but at the vast, unforgiving expanse off cotton fields. She wore a dress cobbled together from old silk curtains. Its color, a defiant green, clashed violently with the desolate red clay off the property. Odette was born for ease and adoration, but the world had proven a harsh teacher. Her beauty was undeniable, striking, but her eyes held a hard, calculating glint off pure survival. She possessed a terrible certainty she would never ever go hungry again. It is a shame, Odette. The slow, melancholy voice belonged to her distant cousin Eulalie, who still wore mourning black. Belle Reve requires a man of strong principle, now a man like Major Vance, but he cannot save us. Strong principle has led us directly to this starvation, Eulalie, Odette stated, her voice tight with impatience. She moved with restless, kinetic energy. She refused to surrender to the nostalgic grief that consumed her peers. She was fighting a new war, a war against debt and the crushing, methodical tyranny of taxation. The family possessed 2 enduring, immutable problems. The land taxes were due at the end of the month. If the taxes were not fully met, a northern consortium led by the ruthless Josiah Fisk stood ready to seize Belle Reve, cutting Odette off from the single piece of earth she was determined to hold. The other problem was her heart, rigidly fixated on a ghost. Major Alice, the ghost of chivalry. Alistair returned from the conflict, a broken, wasted man. He possessed a beautiful, tortured soul, but no physical ability to save anything, least of all himself. He had married the gentle, good Eliza March, a woman Odette tolerated only because Eliza possessed the rare virtue of unwavering loyalty. Odette pursued Alistair with a ferocious, secret energy. He was the perfect, idealized reflection of the life she had been robbed of. She loved him not for who he was now, but for the immutable idea of what he represented. The annual Reconstruction Ball, held in a repurposed military barracks in Atlanta, was their first major social test. Odette wore her curtain silk gown, making it look like a defiant banner. She needed money. She needed a substantial infusion of capital before Fisk could strike. In a humid corner off the ballroom, Odette watched Alistair dance with Eliza. His face was etched with pain, his movements clumsy. She felt a familiar aching tenderness, a feeling she mistook for profound love. You look like you are meticulously measuring the distance between their heartbeats, missed. Claire. The voice was low, cynical, and dangerously close. Odette turned slowly, her green eyes flashing. Captain Rhys Tremaine stood before her. He was a man built for a century that had not yet been invented. Tall, dark, and impeccably dressed in a suit that spoke of a fortune acquired quickly and possibly illegally. Rhys was a figure of intense, complicated scrutiny. He had made his immense wealth during the blockade, smuggling, or worse. He was entirely outside the established societal rules. Captain Tremaine, Odette replied, her voice cooling instantly. You possess a habit of disturbing a lady's private contemplation? Contemplation or a calculation? Rhys smiled, a slow, knowing gesture that reached his dangerous eyes. You are contemplating how many bales of cotton Major Vance is worth now, which is to say none at all. And you are calculating how quickly you can acquire a husband with a bank account that can successfully withstand a Yankee tax levy. You are unbearably presumptuous. I am merely translating your emerald stare into plain economic terms. I find your honesty, Miss Claire, entirely refreshing. You are a woman who admits that survival is not always a morally pure endeavor. He leaned closer. You are a Southern belle who burns with a Northern financier's ruthlessness. I find that deeply attractive. The proposal of necessity. Rhys offered her a glass of illicit French champagne. I understand your taxes are due soon. I possess capital that currently resides in a number of unstable ventures. I could provide you with a temporary solution. Say a loan at an astronomical but perfectly manageable interest rate. Odette's pride bristled. I refuse to accept charity from a blockade runner. It is not charity. It is a business transaction between 2 acutely desperate individuals. Think of me as a necessary, distasteful tool for survival. Odette refused him, curtly, determined to find a more dignified solution. But a dignified solution simply did not exist. Days later, a letter arrived from Josiah Fisk stating that the tax foreclosure proceedings would commence immediately. Odette was trapped. She needed a large sum of liquid money instantly. She thought of Alistair, but he was useless. She thought of Rez, but his offer was tainted. She went to a nearby town and visited her father's former business associate, Miff Henderson, a widower known for his substantial fortune. He was elderly, kind, but hopelessly dull. Henderson. Odette began turning on the full, devastating force of her famous charm. Belle Reve is in danger. I require a part. She left the town 3 hours later, engaged to Miss Henderson. It was a marriage based on pure financial necessity, a grim sacrifice made on the altar of survival. The short-lived bargain, the wedding, was a quiet, hasty affair barely a month after the Reconstruction ball. Odette did not love Henderson. She barely tolerated his quiet presence, but his bank account was a powerful, irresistible comfort. The marriage bought her time. It paid the taxes and secured Bellarve for the moment. Odette immediately used the financial security to begin building her own future. She refused to be merely a wife. She needed a true source of income independent of any man. Using a portion of the marriage fund, she opened a modest wood mill, intending to profit from the massive demand for rebuilding materials in post-war Atlanta. Rise Tremaine heard off the marriage quickly. He sent Odette a single massive wreath of black roses tied with a note: "Survival is a magnificent cruel art, my dear. But you always choose the most expensive canvas." Odette burned the note. She would survive. She would succeed. And she would prove to Rise Tremaine that her ambition was a moral force in itself. But she still clung to the phantom memory of Alastair visiting Eliza, and Alastair, under the guise of familial obligation, nourishing her beautiful, futile illusion. The inevitable occurred a year and a half later. Henderson, weakened by years of ill health, passed away quietly in his sleep. Odette, suddenly a very young, very wealthy widow, was free, and she was ready to return to the fray. Bellarve. And now she would buy respect. The ascendancy off the mill. Odette's Claire. Now Odette Henderson was free. She was no longer bound by the quiet, demanding presence of Midgers Henderson, but she was bound absolutely by her relentless drive. She poured her entire widow's inheritance and ferocious energy into her wood mill. The business flourished. Odette possessed a terrifying clarity about money. She was willing to cut corners, ignore sentiment, and work hours that would fell a weaker man. Her success became a scandalous, whispered marvel in Atlanta. Society, the same society that had scorned her for her desperation, now courted her for her wealth. Her mill was the engine of local reconstruction, and even the most rigid matrons required her lumber for their new homes. Odette bought herself a new wardrobe of defiant silks and velvet fabrics that announced her arrival in the new order. She was no longer our girl patching curtains. She was. Rise Tremaine remained a constant, unsettling presence on the edges of her life. He often visited her mill, leaning against a stack of polished lumber, his amused gaze following her every ruthless transaction. "You have increased the workforce off your mill by 20% this quarter," Odette Rise observed one humid afternoon. "And you paid the laborers a shilling less per day than your competition." A very pragmatic approach to capitalism. "If you have no constructive business, Captain Tremaine, do not interfere with mine." Odette snapped, checking a ledger. "But this is my business." "Your lack of sentiment is magnificent," Rise purred, stepping closer. "Most women off your former standing weep over their lost gentility. You simply use the tears off others to grease your own machinery. I admire your genius, my dear." Rise was right. She had learned to thrive on calculation. She had become an astute negotiator, capable of terrifying even veteran businessmen. She needed his help not for money but for his unique connections. Rise controlled the flow of certain vital contracts and possessed a pervasive network of influence with the military officials occupying the territory. "I require that large railroad contract," Odette stated one evening over smuggled port in a private room. "And what precisely are you willing to exchange for my assistance, Miss Henderson?" Rez asked, his eyes darkening with unspoken meaning. "Your usual percentage off the net profits, of course." "Money is a profoundly dull currency between us, Odette. I require a different exchange. I require you to be honest. To look at me and admit that you are more ambitious, more immoral, and more capable of raw survival than any man you have ever known." Odette looked at him, her green eyes cold. "If that is what it requires to secure the contract, then yes, I am all of those things. Now execute your promise." Rise smiled, a flash of white in the dim light. "I shall secure the contract, but I shall reserve the right to collect my true payment later in a form of your choosing." The phantom love, despite her success and newfound ruthlessness, Odette still clung fiercely to her illusion regarding Alastair Vance. She visited Eliza and Alastair regularly at their small, deteriorating farm. She bought them provisions, paid for Alastair's medical bills, and ensured Eliza's comfort. She did this not out of charity, but because her generosity allowed her to maintain proximity to her idealized dream. Alastair remained polite, courteous, but profoundly distant. He could not thrive in the harsh light of the new reality. He spent his days brooding, writing poetry, and mourning the world that was lost. "Oh, Alastair," Odette sighed one afternoon, finding him sitting under a dying oak tree. "Why do you not simply take charge? Why do you let life proceed without your authority?" "That world requires a different kind of man," Odette. Alastair replied sadly. "A man who is not like Rise." The comparison stung Odette, mixing her genuine devotion to the ideal with a visceral, unwelcome acknowledgement of risk potency. Odette immediately redoubled her efforts to help Alastair, buying him a new horse and investing in his meager crop yield. She needed him to succeed, if only to prove that her ideals were not entirely hollow. The rising threat, the growing prosperity of Odette's mill attracted a new formidable enemy. Josiah Fisk, the northern financier who had attempted to seize Belle Arve, saw Odette as a direct competitor and a stubborn obstacle to his regional dominance. Fisk began using his vast network of military and political influence to obstruct Odette's business. He manipulated local tax. He diverted essential building materials. He was determined to force her into bankruptcy. Odette realized that her mill required more than just capital and contracts. It required power and social protection. Fisk was destroying her reputation with legal threats and public slander, calling her methods barbaric and her contracts illegal. She needed a name-off substance, a man who could elevate her social standing and provide a solid legal shield against Fisk's calculated aggression. She needed a partner with undisputed social authority. She considered several local gentlemen, but they were too weak, too mired in their own debt and past failures. Only one name emerged as both financially viable and socially advantageous: Captain Rise Tremaine. Rise possessed the money. Rise possessed the criminal cleverness to fight Fisk. But Rise was a social pariah. Marrying him would be a scandal of the first magnitude. But Odette, facing the potential annihilation of everything she had built, realized that scandal was a small price to pay for the ultimate security. She found Rise in a private club discussing illegal liquor licenses with a local military officer. She approached him, her face a mask of calculated resolve. "Captain Tremaine," Odette stated, her voice formal, "I have a business proposition for you. A partnership of a very unique nature." Rise put down his glass, his dark eyes instantly alight with interest. "Indeed, Miss Henderson. I require a husband who can provide a shield against Ms. Fisk's machinations and a continuous flow of capital for my expansion. You require alpha aid off social respectability to solidify your questionable fortune. I propose we combine forces. I propose marriage." Rise leaned back in his chair, a long, slow smile spreading across his face. "Magnificent. But what of your heart? Do you claim to love?" "My heart is a tool for my survival, Captain. I require a partner who understands the absolute necessity of ruthlessness, not a romantic. Do you accept the terms of this business arrangement?" "I accept," Rise confirmed, "and I promise you a marriage of spectacular conflict and absolute honesty. But remember, Odette, I always collect my payment, and I shall demand more than mere business from you." The union of convenience, the marriage of Odette Henderson to Captain Rise Tremaine, was a scandal that rocked the fragile social fabric of post-war Atlanta. Society accepted the union as a necessary evil. They required risk money for reconstruction, and they required Odette's mill for lumber, but they intensely gossiped about the sheer immorality of the pairing. The wedding itself was a muted affair, a stark contrast to the grand weddings Odette had once dreamed of. There was no pretense of love. It was a formal signing off a profound business contract witnessed by a handful of cynical friends and the obligatory family members. Their new residence, a restored mansion in Atlanta, was a spectacle of wealth. Rise spared no expense in furnishing it, providing Odette with a level of luxury she had desperately craved since the war. But the house felt cold, opulent, a gilded cage built entirely for show. "We must present a flawless united front," Rise Odette instructed him on their first morning, examining the intricate lace on her new dressing gown. "Your business methods must not compromise my social standing, and my ambition must not compromise your political maneuvers." "A flawless front is precisely what I purchased," Rise agreed, his voice dry. He stood by the window, impeccably dressed. "But I remind you, my dear, we are partners in all things, including the absolute truth. You will find that I have very little tolerance for the performance of romantic devotion." Their life together was a constant negotiation of power and wit. Odette discovered that Rise was a profoundly attentive husband, anticipating her needs and providing resources without question. But he never gave her emotional safety. He constantly observed her, challenging her motives and forcing her to acknowledge the pragmatic ruthlessness that fueled her success. The haunting illusion, despite the complexity of her marriage and the immense focus on her mill, Odette could not relinquish her illusion regarding Alastair Vance. She continued to visit Eliza and Alastair at their struggling farm, using the immense profits from her mill to buy them necessities. Rise observed these visits with a keen, cynical eye. "You are buying his proximity, Odette," he stated one evening, watching her meticulously prepare a basket of food for Eliza. "You use your wealth to maintain a shrine to a past that is utterly dead." "I am merely fulfilling a familial obligation," Odette retorted, feeling the familiar prickle of guilt. "Obligation?" Rise scoffed, taking her hand and pulling her close. "You do nothing without a precise motive. You help Alastair because he is the perfect, noble reflection of what you believe you deserve." He is a symbol off the Southern chivalry that was lost. I, however, am the living, breathing proof off the brutal reality that saved you, and you hate the reality. Rise kissed her then, kiss-off challenge and possessive intensity. Their physical relationship was as tumultuous as their arguments. It was fueled by desperate mutual understanding off each other's profound complexity. Odette admitted even to herself that Rise was the only man who truly saw her ambition, her avarice, and her fear, and still desired her. But she still believed she truly loved the idea off Alastair. The attack off Fisk. Josiah Fisk, the northern financier, intensified his campaign to destroy Odette's mill. He used his political connections to raise taxes on her specific lumber exports. He introduced legislation designed to limit her workforce. Odette was forced to rely heavily on Risk's extensive network of contacts, both legal and questionably illegal, to fight back. Rise proved a formidable, indispensable ally. He did not fight. He understood Fisk's motivations and attacked his weaknesses with a cunning that terrified Odette yet thrilled her practical sense. You must accept, Odette, that honor is a luxury we cannot afford in this particular war, Rise advised, reviewing Fisk's corporate documents. Fisk seeks to destroy you. We must destroy his reputation first. Odette found herself drawn into Rest's darker world, making decisions that went against the remnants of her social upbringing, but which secured her financial and social survival. She discovered a genuine thrill in the intellectual battle. The social summit to solidify her social standing and combat Fisk's escalating slander. Odette decided to host the grandest ball Atlanta had seen since the war. It was a defiant, brazen act. Rise supported the venture, completely recognizing it as a necessary display of power. He utilized his influence to ensure that every important political and military figure attended, forcing the social elite to acknowledge Odette's acceptance. In the days leading up to the ball, Odette found herself contemplating her life. She possessed the wealth, the mill, the manor, and a husband who was force off nature. But she was terribly alone. She realized her ambition was a vast empty room. She visited Alastair one last time before the ball, desperate for validation. Alastair, she whispered, tell me I have not become a villain. Tell me I'm still worthy of the past. Alastair looked at her, his eyes filled with profound sadness. Odette, you are a force off nature. You possess immense courage, but the past is, and you have chosen a path where courage is not always aligned with virtue. His response was a profound disappointment. He refused to give her the moral absolution she craved. That evening, Odette dressed for her ball, wearing a spectacular gown of gold satin. She looked in the mirror, seeing a woman of undisputed power, but also a woman profoundly isolated by her own choices. She wore the world as her crown, but she wore her isolation as her true cloak. She was ready for the ball, ready for the social victory, but she was not ready for the devastating truth that lay just beneath the surface of her glittering life. The summit off Defiance, the grand ball hosted by Captain and Mrs. Tremaine, was Atlanta's defining social event off the era. It was a brazen, magnificent display off defiant wealth, filling the air with the scent off imported flowers and the sound off European orchestras. Odette, draped in a gown off shimmering gold satin that seemed to capture the light, presided over the assembly. Her true objective was not pleasure but social acceptance and the consolidation of her considerable power against majestic Fisk. Rise moved through the crowd with the ease of a king, his dark eyes missing nothing. He utilized his subtle influence to ensure that military governors, powerful politicians, and even reluctant members of the old Southern aristocracy paid their respects to Odette. The social victory was absolute, and it was now undeniable. In a quiet corner, however, Alastair Vance stood with his wife Eliza. Alastair's presence was a painful concession to Eliza's loyalty to Odette. Odette drew Alastair away from the noise, seeking the final necessary validation for her empire. Alastair, Odette urged, her voice low. Look at this room. Look at what I have built. I fought them all. I fought. Tell me that this was worth the struggle. Tell me that my courage is a virtue. Alastair looked at the magnificent, chaotic room and then back at Odette, his eyes filled with profound exhaustion. You possess a terrifying courage, Odette, but you have chosen methods that leave a trail of deep exhaustion and profound human cost. I cannot validate the moral structure of this kingdom you have forged. His refusal to grant her absolution struck Odette with the force of a physical blow. He refused to sanctify her sacrifices. She was left standing alone, surrounded by the fruits of her labor, but utterly devoid of the moral comfort she craved. The price of the partnership that night, after the last cynical guest had departed, Odette stood in her private salon, stripping off her jewels. Rise entered, his expression no longer amused but intensely serious. The night was a triumph, Odette. Fisk was cornered and the elite recognized your absolute sovereignty. But Alastair would not validate it, Odette whispered, the immense facade collapsing. He sees me as a villain. Rise approached, taking her shoulders. You are not a villain. You are a survivor. And Alastair is a fool who loves ghosts more than he loves the fierce reality of a living woman. You obsess over him because he is the perfect symbol of the past you want to buy back. He pressed his challenge. You are consumed by a phantom. You cling to the illusion of Alistair to avoid acknowledging the only man who truly sees you and who possesses the courage to be as ruthlessly ambitious as you are. Rise kissed her then a possessive turbulent kiss that demanded truth. I have collected my payment, Odette. Your acknowledgement of me is not a moral choice. It is an act of inevitable submission to the truth of who you are. The inevitable betrayal risk constant pressure began to expose the frailty of Odette's attachment to Alistair. Rise challenged her to stop funding Alistair's failing farm. Odette, unable to sever the tie, used increasingly complex financial manipulations to maintain the flow of money. The situation came to a head when Mr. Fiske, in his final desperate gambit, uncovered evidence of risk-questionable wartime transactions, specifically involvement in black market goods that were technically treasonous. Fiske threatened to expose Rise, aiming to destroy Odette's mill by attacking her husband's legitimacy. Rise, facing legal ruin, was forced to make a ruthless move. He utilized his illegal network to sabotage Fiske's primary northern lumber yard, effectively paralyzing Fiske's business operations and delaying the public exposure of Risk's own past. Odette, realizing the gravity of Risk's actions, confronted him. You have committed a felony. You risk everything. I risked everything to protect our future. Rise countered, his voice hard. You claim to love Alistair because he is moral, yet you rely on my immorality for your very existence. Odette was forced to make a choice that secured her survival but destroyed her moral comfort. She used her political contacts to ensure the military investigation into Risk's sabotage was minimized and discreetly buried. She chose survival over virtue. The death of the illusion, the mounting pressure finally broke the fragile Major Alistair Vance. Confronted by the harsh reality of his failing farm, the guilt of relying on Odette's questionable generosity, and his inability to cope with the new society, Alistair attempted a final desperate business venture that failed catastrophically. Rise, seeing Alistair's emotional collapse, warned Odette. Alistair is dissolving. He needs stability, not your complicated pity. If you truly wish him well, let him go. Odette rushed to the farm, finding Alistair in a state of profound mental distress. For the first time, she saw him not as the idealized knight of the past, but as a weak, utterly useless man. Her years of desperate, misguided love for the phantom idea of Alistair vanished instantly. The illusion had died. She saw the truth. Her passion had always been a fierce need to reclaim her lost world. Alistair was merely the symbol she had mistakenly worshipped. In that moment of brutal clarity, Odette realized that the only person she truly loved, the only person who matched her ambition and terrifying capacity for survival, was Rise Tremaine. She loved him desperately, entirely, and without reserve. She rushed back to Atlanta, searching for Rise, filled with this new, terrifying, emotional truth. She found a letter on her dressing table, written in Risk's elegant hand. My dearest Odette, I know you have finally found the truth of your heart. I know you love me, but you only came to this truth when your illusion could no longer serve your purpose. You do not yet truly desire me for myself. I will not be your desperate necessity. I will not be your last choice after the symbol of your past has been thoroughly broken. I have settled our business. I have secured your milk. I am gone. When you learn what true desire is, perhaps our paths will converge again. Res. Odette stood in the center of her opulent mansion, surrounded by the undeniable proof of her power, but completely shattered by the loss. She had achieved everything she had ruthlessly fought for, but she had lost the only man who mattered. The silence of the house was immense. She ran to the window, watching the setting sun cast a terrible red glow across the city. She had to win him back. She had to fight for the one thing she could not buy, coerce, or manipulate. She lifted her chin, her green eyes flashing with a terrible, renewed resolve. She knew the ending of this chapter, but she refused to accept the finality of the book. Tomorrow is another day, Odette. Claire whispered to the red fading sky. And I will fight a new war for my ultimate survival. The silence of victory, the immediate wake of Risk's departure, was marked by a chilling, profound silence. Odette had achieved a victory of monumental proportions. Fiske, weakened by the sabotage and facing military pressure from Risk contacts, finally agreed to a humiliating retreat, relinquishing his legal attacks on the mill. Odette's business empire was now secure, but the core of her success felt hollowed out. She had lost the only witness to her true self. Odette did not collapse into grief. She plunged into work with a desperate, manic energy. She expanded her mill, diversified her lumber exports, and used the full force of her financial power to crush any minor competitor who dared to challenge her supremacy. She built her fortress of wealth higher and stronger, hoping that the roar of her success would drown out the quiet agony of her loss. She often reread Risk's farewell letter. You do not yet truly desire me for myself. He had demanded a truth she was incapable of giving him in time, the admission that her need for him was not merely tactical but utterly existential. The rebuilding off soul Odette began a painful, difficult process of self-reckoning. She started by severing the last threads off her illusion. She visited Alistair and Eliza not to patronize but to offer genuine quiet support. She sold Alistair's struggling farm for a fair price, insisting he and Eliza use the money to relocate to a less demanding environment, freeing them from the crushing psychological burden of failure. She recognized this was the final true act of love she could offer Alistair, setting him free from her own destructive pity. She realized that her ruthless pursuit of power had come at a moral cost. She sought to mitigate the damage. She implemented higher wages at her mill. She invested in safe, improved housing for her laborers, recognizing that her power carried a profound essential responsibility. She did this not for public opinion, but because she knew Rise, the man who saw her ruthlessness, would demand her to become better, not just successful. In a surprising symbolic gesture, Odette used a portion of her profits to restore Bel-Air, but she rebuilt it not as a shrine to the Old South, but as a functional modern working plantation. She used the new wealth to stabilize the land, transforming it into a powerful physical testament to her enduring strength, not her tragic victimhood. The pursuit. 6 months after Riss' departure, Odette received a coded message through one of Riss' former associates, a contact she had maintained for purely commercial reasons. The message indicated Rise was in New Orleans, involved in a high-stakes shipping venture. Odette knew what she had to do. She could not wait for him to return. She had to pursue him not with a desperate plea for financial support, but with a complete humble acknowledgement of the profound simple truth of her heart. She packed a single valise and trusted the running of her mill to her most competent manager, and took the first train to New Orleans. New Orleans was a labyrinth of heat, music, and humid secrecy. Odette spent days tracing Riss' movements, feeling a desperate thrill off the hunt. She found him finally late one night in a private gaming house on the edge of the French Quarter. He was seated at a high-stakes poker table, impeccably dressed, his composure radiating that controlled, cynical air of absolute mastery. Odette watched him from a shadowed doorway. He was magnificent, dangerous, and completely indifferent to the world outside his game. She approached the table, her shadow falling across his hand of cards. "Captain Tremaine," Odette said, her voice steady but low enough to avoid disturbing the other players. "I have come a considerable distance to settle a debt." Rise looked up slowly. His eyes, dark and analytical, held hers without surprise. He gestured to a nearby empty chair. "A pleasure. But I assure you my ledgers show your account is settled. Mathematically you owe me nothing. The financial account is closed," Odette confirmed, taking the chair. "But the spiritual account remains disastrously overdrawn. I have come to confess a profound error in my calculation." The confession. Rise leaned back, a faint cynical smile touching his lips. "And what profound error did the great Mist? Did Fisk manage to secure a new injunction?" "I miscalculated the fundamental value of human connection," Odette admitted, her eyes burning with intensity. "I believed that my ambition was the sole engine of my being. I believed that my heart was a mere tool for survival. I pursued a hollow ghost to maintain a beautiful illusion." She paused, forcing the difficult essential words out. "I realized that the survival I fought for was only possible because of the sheer strength you offered. And when you departed, I discovered that the kingdom I built was absolutely nothing without the king who saw its brutal, honest truth. I require you, Rez," she confessed, her voice dropping to a raw whisper. "Not for your money, not for your protection, not for your strategic counsel, but because I am finally capable of admitting that I desire your specific, complex self more than I desire every single piece of lumber in my mill and every acre off Bel-Air." Rez remained utterly still, his eyes searching hers, looking for the calculated performance he had always anticipated. But he found only a raw, exhausted truth. He sighed, pushing his immense stack of chips forward, declaring a stunning fold. He rose, ignoring the protests of the other players, and offered Odette his hand. "The gaming house is a profoundly unsuitable venue for such a monumental confession, my dear," Rez stated. "I suggest we procure a substantial supply of French brandy and find a private balcony overlooking the Mississippi River. I have much to analyze, and I suspect you have much to regret." Odette took his hand, her spirit entirely humbled, her resolve renewed. She knew this was not a simple, easy reunion. It was the start of a new, terrifying negotiation for a partnership founded on vulnerability, and negotiation she was finally ready to face. She had fought a war for wealth. Now she would fight a far more difficult war for love. The private summons. Rise Tremaine rented a secluded, opulent suite overlooking the dark, turbulent waters off the Mississippi River. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and the distant, mournful sound of a steam whistle. He procured a vintage bottle of French brandy and settled Odette on a velvet sofa, maintaining a respectful, almost clinical distance. "Your confession was remarkably articulated," Odette Reyes began, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "It possessed a flawless logical progression. But as you know, I am in a perpetual state of skepticism when presented with emotional arguments. I expected no less, Odette replied, her voice firm despite the profound internal fear. You are entitled to your skepticism. But I remind you, I am here not because I was forced, but because my will demanded it. I have placed my thriving mill in the hands of a manager who is demonstrably less competent than myself. That, Captain, is a sacrifice quantifiable only by genuine desire. Rise smiled faint. Powerful logistical concession. You have always argued with the precise terms of economic risk. So let us proceed with the financial model. You state that your value system has shifted from survival to truth. What guarantees do you offer that this shift is permanent and not merely a strategic maneuver to reclaim the convenient counsel off my darker network? The guarantee is the work I have executed in your absence, Odette countered. She outlined the transformation off Belle Arve, rebuilt not as a plantation off the past, but as a modern functional land holding. She detailed the implemented wage increases at her mill and the improved housing for her laborers. I am building a life that you would demand off me, Rise. A life built on responsibility, not just ruthless profit. Rise listened intently, his expression unreadable. You are attempting to demonstrate virtue. I find virtue boring, Odette. I find your former calculating ruthlessness far more attractive. Then I offer you a complexity that you cannot resist, Odette insisted, meeting his challenging gaze. I offer you a woman who possesses the ferocity of a buccaneer, but who now directs that ferocity toward ethical efficiency. I need your cynicism to check my ambition. I need your lack of moral constraint to protect my newfound desire for justice. I offer you a partnership off checks and balances. Rise finally set down his glass. A compelling argument, but still incomplete. He moved to the window, staring at the river. What guarantees do I possess that the ghost of Major Alistair Vance is truly unequivocally laid to rest? That you do not retain a shrine in the deepest corner of your heart? Alistair is gone, Odette said simply. I loved the elegant symbol of the past. I saw him recently, a man destroyed by the present. My illusion shattered entirely. I realized that my longing was for a world that you would have laughed at, a world that you would never have survived. The only man who ever truly belonged in the harsh reality of my survival is you, Captain Tremaine. I seek a partner who is not afraid of my power, but who demands that I wield it. The terms of the new partnership. Riz turned back, his dark eyes intense. Very well. We have established the terms of our negotiation. You have satisfied my demand for a profound, undeniable emotional admission. But I will not return to Atlanta merely as your partner. I possess my own conditions. He outlined them with the precision of a legal contract. First, you will acknowledge publicly that your success was not built solely on feminine charm, but on a mind as ruthless as any man's. You will take complete unapologetic credit for the mill's expansion. Agreed. Second, you will sever all remaining business ties with any firm attempting to resurrect the old corrupt order off the South. Your mill will adhere to a standard of labor that is demonstrably above that of your competitors. Agreed. That is already in process. Third, I will require you to sell Belle Arve. Gasp. Sell Belle. It is the core of everything I fought for. It is a magnificent piece of land, Odette. But it is also a monument to your pain, your desperate need to reclaim a past that hates you. We will sell it, liquidate the memory, and invest the capital in a new, entirely clean business venture in a new city. We will create our own legacy untainted by the ghosts of the Old South. I will not live in the shadow of your former desperation. Odette felt a visceral resistance, but she saw the profound logical truth in his demand. Belle Arve was a beautiful prison of memory. I accept your terms, Odette conceded, her voice barely a whisper. We sell Belle. Rise stepped forward, closing the distance between them. And our final term, Odette. You will never again attempt to define our relationship by the superficial terms of society. We are partners in scandal, partners in wealth, and partners in a love that is too complicated for the drawing room. You will never again ask me for moral absolution. You will accept my profound necessary ruthlessness as a component of our survival. I accept the necessity of your ruthlessness, Odette affirmed. Rise reached out, brushing a stray curl from her cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle. Then I believe our negotiation is complete. We leave for our new life at dawn. He did not kiss her immediately. He held her gaze, allowing the magnitude of their decision to settle between them. He finally gave a slow, triumphant smile. Tomorrow is a new day, Odette, and it is entirely ours. The final act of release, the sale off Belle Arve, was executed swiftly and ruthlessly by Rise Tremaine. Odette watched from afar, feeling a complex mixture of genuine grief and profound, terrifying liberation. The money realized from the sale was immense, but more importantly, the act severed her final agonizing tie to the world that had tried to crush her. She kept only a single immense portrait of the Belle Arve manor house, not as a memorial to its beauty, but as a reminder of the terrible cost of survival. Rise and Odette traveled north away from the stifling heat and the ghosts of Louisiana. They settled in a burgeoning industrial center, establishing their new combined business, a powerful shipping and trade conglomerate that capitalized on the expanding rail lines and river commerce. They worked side by side, a partnership of staggering efficacy. Odette's keen business acumen balanced calculated risks, and extensive shadowy network of contacts. Their marriage, stripped off its social pretense, settled into a unique, intense reality. They argued fiercely over every logistical decision, every investment, but their conflicts were rooted in profound mutual respect. They were both accustomed to absolute command, and their private life was a perpetual negotiation of wills. "You have underestimated the volatile nature of the copper market," Odette stated one morning reviewing a manifest. "And you have overestimated the basic intelligence of the average shipping agent, my dear," Rise countered, not looking up from his telegraph. "Your logic is flawed when applied to human sloth." Their private passion was equally intense, fueled by the acknowledgement of their shared darkness and their mutual unreserved desire. They possessed a bond forged in fire and survival, a bond that transcended the polite, fragile affections demanded by society. The public face of power, Rise and Odette quickly became dominant figures in their new city. Their wealth was undeniable, but their methods remained unorthodox. Rise continued to operate on the edges of legality, but Odette ensured that their public ventures adhered meticulously to the highest ethical standards, a constant source of fascinating private tension between them. Odette used her renewed legitimate position to subtly challenge social norms. She refused to retreat into the traditional role of a mere duchess. She took direct control of the shipping manifests, met with suppliers, and demanded respect in a world exclusively dominated by men. Her confidence was absolute, her intelligence formidable. Rise observed her ascendancy with immense possessive pride. He enjoyed watching her wield power. He had purchased a powerful, magnificent partner, and he never permitted anyone to forget her true status. One evening at a formal dinner hosted by our rival industrialist, the host attempted to dismiss Odette's influence. "Tremaine, while your husband's wealth is commendable, surely you find the logistical aspects of the shipping business rather overwhelming for our lady's sensibilities," the host condescended. Odette smiled, a precise, cold gesture. "On the contrary, I find that applying the rigorous efficiency of survival to the movement of cargo is a far more direct and satisfying use of one's intellect than supervising a parlor." Rise, seated nearby, raised his glass slightly to Odette, a silent toast to her masterful defense. He had demanded that she wield her power, and she did so without fail. A glimpse of the past. One quiet winter afternoon, Odette received a brief formal letter. It was from Eliza Vance. Eliza wrote off their new modest home in Virginia. She reported that Alistair had found a small teaching position. They were living simply, finding a quiet peace away from the ruins of the South. Odette reread the letter, feeling a profound sense of closure, not pain. She saw the Alistair in the letter as a fragile, contented figure. He belonged in that quiet life. He had never belonged in the tumultuous, demanding reality of her existence. She showed the letter to Rise. Rise read the letter and smiled, a genuine, soft smile that rarely touched his cynical face. "The ghost is truly laid to rest, Odette. You see him not as a symbol of what you lost, but as a person who found his proper place. He required peace," Odette agreed, "and I required a perpetual war. A perpetual war that we fight entirely together," Rise confirmed, pulling her close. Their story was no longer about survival alone. It was about creating a new shared definition of success, one built on unreserved honesty, mutual respect, and a love that found its strength in recognizing and accepting the complex flaws of the other. Odette had fought to reclaim a life she had lost. She had lost that original life entirely, but she had found something infinitely better, a partnership forged in the fire of their own ambition and undeniable truth.